His name is Harry Houdini, and he was one of a kind. As the world's most famous escape artist, he brought magic to the masses. He was also a very complex man who would do almost anything for audience adulation.
The intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least.
They would almost break down theater doors to get in to see him.
He was one of the greatest showmen this or any century has ever known.
He would milk his audiences. He would make them cry and cheer.
He has come to define what we mean when we use the word magic.
You can walk down the streets even today and ask a child Houdini, and he looks at you and he says, magic. That doesn't happen with any other magician.
Harry Houdini, the greatest escape artist the world has ever known, promised his wife that if he died before she did, he would try to return to her from beyond the grave. From a less audacious man, such a vow would be ludicrous. His resolve to cheat even death carried a strange plausibility, so much so that thousands of people regard his death as only the first act. Every October 31st, many gather at seances to see if Houdini will live up to his pledge. Interest in the master mystifier is as pervasive as ever. There have been magic shops, books, theatrical productions, and films. The question is how Houdini has managed to defy death and time to become such a hero and icon.
He became the ultimate meaningful magician because his magic was really about something. He tapped into people's need and needs of the time. The sense that they were going through of this overwhelming mechanization of the age, that humans were just becoming cogs in big wheels. And Harry stood up and said, no, there's nothing that can hold back the individual human spirit. Nothing can keep us down, that you need to struggle to break free.
The other part of it is that he was doing miracles. I mean, you have to go back to biblical times, really, to find anything comparable to some of the things that Houdini did. They seemed like real magic.
Houdini walked through brick walls. He escaped from jail cells. He even made an elephant vanish in front of thousands. The life of Houdini is the stuff from which legends are made. More often than not, the author of those legends was Houdini himself. Sid Radner inherited the largest collection of Houdini artifacts from Houdini's magician brother Houdini. His fascination gives him a unique perspective into the legend of Harry Houdini.
One of the things he gave me was the original biography of Houdini, which in this particular copy is intriguing because if you look in the flyleaf, you'll see what's written. First, what he wrote on one side of the page, in which he wrote, Theo Houdini, brother of Houdini, this book is full of lies.
The lies surrounding Houdini's life begin with his birth. Records prove that Houdini was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1874. However, Houdini claimed to be born in Appleton, Wisconsin. Separating fact from fiction has been a long-term labor of love for Houdini biographer Ken Silverman.
He came with his family to America, to the States, when he was 4 years old. I think that's explained simply by the psychology of a lot of immigrants who didn't want to be known as greenhorns. And a lot of people who came to the States or to Canada from Europe, insisted that they had really been born here.
Devotees of the American dream have found inspiration in the story of Harry Houdini.
I identify myself very much with Harry Houdini, being the typical immigrant overachiever. I found it to be very inspiring to me how this little immigrant boy from Hungary became what he did, became what he became, and still around us.
Chasing the American dream was not easy for the Weisz family. Houdini was born Erik Weisz, one of 6 children. Cecilia Weisz, Houdini's mother, maintained that he never cried as a baby, and like most boys, he found magicians fascinating. Houdini's father, Samuel Weisz, found it difficult to make ends meet as a rabbi in Appleton, Wisconsin. He moved his family to Milwaukee and then to New York City to find work.
They were so badly off in Milwaukee that they had to apply to a charity just to get coal for the winter and to borrow $50 to keep them going. He didn't do any better in New York either. And ultimately, when Houdini was about 16, his father developed tongue cancer and died of that. The failure of his father, Rabbi Weisz, was always a big spur for Houdini. He was always afraid of ending up broke and old, like his father. There's a wonderful place in his diary where he talks about being in front of a pawn shop and he sees some trophies that were given to some famous person, and now the trophies are ending up in the pawn shop. And he did have this kind of fear that he was going to end up that way, that he too might become very famous but then end up as an old man, broke and unknown.
Young Erik Weisz vowed to make things better for his family. At 12, he left home and worked as a shoeshine boy. By 19, he joined a carnival.
He worked in cheap circuses, not big circuses, where he sometimes performed as a wild man. I mean, he served also to, be in a cage and you could throw meat into the cage at him. Also, very importantly, he worked as an acrobat. It's not generally known about Houdini, but he worked out with some acrobats in the circus, and it's unappreciated, but he was a very strong, very acrobatic person.
By 1894, Erik was performing as a card manipulator. At 17, he took the name Houdini from the famous French illusionist Robert Houdin, his magician hero. His first name, Harry, came from Airy, the pet name his mother called him. Houdini performed with his brother Theo, who took the stage name Hardin. While performing in Coney Island, Harry met his future wife, Bess. They were married in just 2 weeks. The thought of the innocent Bess working at Coney Island would not be appropriate for his image, so throughout his life, in all published accounts, he stated that they met on a streetcar.
Actually, she was traveling with a Floridora girls, traveling as a dancer in a rather cheap type of act. And in those days, girls in show business doing that exactly weren't the most respectable.
She told me she met him at a little place in Coney Island. She was singing, and he was very poor.
Dorothy Young Kiami got to know Bess Houdini very well. She was an assistant on Houdini's last tour in 1926.
They were a loving couple. They knew each other well, they were acclimated, and they had nice expressions, loving expressions come across the table, but they weren't obviously affectionate.
Despite his love for Bess, Harry made it very clear that there was another woman in his life. After the death of his father, the support of his mother fell to Houdini and his brothers. Harry swore he would take care of his beloved mother, and he did so in spectacular fashion. After making it big in vaudeville, he showered her with $1,000 in gold coins, a week's salary.
He wrote to his mother constantly. The reason we don't have any of his letters to his mother is that at his death, in his will, he asked that all his letters to his mother be taken and tied up and used as the pillow in his coffin. And in fact, that was done. The letters were all gathered up and he was buried with them together. It was an extremely close relationship. It's hard to know how Bess Houdini really tolerated it.
When Houdini married Bess, she replaced his brother Hardin as his assistant. But it was a constant struggle. They performed a mind-reading act and magic tricks. They also performed the metamorphosis as their main illusion.
That was probably the trick that started his career. It was the most famous trick and he puzzled lots and lots of people. Today it's done by lots of magicians and done very well.
He did it bang, bang. It was literally 1, 2, 3, and the exchange was made. He wasn't the first one to do it. I mean, there are several other people who were doing something very like the substitution trunk, but he advertised to do it faster than anybody else. One of Houdini's greatest achievements on the stage, and the thing that he really prided himself on most, was the so-called challenge handcuff act. Early in his career, before he became a big vaudeville star, he would invite people to bring up their own handcuffs, and he would offer to get out of them.
Houdini's aggressive ambition elevated him from sideshow performer to magician in just 6 years. Yet despite his initial success, he was still waiting for that big break.
The famous story is that an agent in Chicago, Martin Beck, who was the head of the big Western vaudeville circuit, saw Houdini perform in Minneapolis, saw him doing some handcuff escapes, and said to him, well, look, that's what you really should be doing. This is what you're really good at. This is what audiences really respond to.
Beck hired Houdini to appear on the vaudeville circuit, where Houdini began to develop his escapes. They evolved into powerful visual symbols representing the strength of the human spirit. Unfortunately, American audiences did not respond as enthusiastically as he'd expected. In an ironic move for the Patriot, Bess and Harry left America, risking all they had on a bold plan to conquer the music halls of Europe. In 1900, Harry and Bess Houdini arrived in England. Harry immediately began to formulate plans to conquer the British music halls. In a bold move, Houdini convinced the manager of a London theater to accompany him to the headquarters of Scotland Yard, where he demonstrated his amazing abilities. Houdini was silent as an officer handcuffed him around a pole and commented, "That's the way we lock 'em up around here." Houdini freed himself instantly and replied, "And that's the way we get out of them in America." He was booked for a theater engagement on the spot, and he opened the following week.
Over the next 3 years, he took Europe by storm. He became a tremendous star of the British music halls, and an even greater star maybe of the German cabaret and circus and vaudeville circuit.
They would almost break down theater doors to get in to see him. He was beginning to get some of the highest salaries, and eventually he got the highest salaries of any entertainer in Europe.
The novelty of Houdini's act was part of the reason for his huge success in Europe. His compact, muscular body, the result of disciplined exercise, made Houdini the world's first sex symbol.
Houdini was a very good-looking man, highly athletic. I think he saw a little bit of sex, too, also, with his performances.
He often did them naked to show that he had nowhere to hide his keys.
He was very different to the conventional magician coming out, the stuffy magician with a rabbit coming out of a hat. And so he caused quite a splash in Europe.
Another reason for Houdini's great success was his showmanship. Before Houdini, escapes had very little theatrical flair. Part of his genius was his ability to develop escapes into suspenseful theater.
Houdini did more than just escape from things. Houdini was one of the greatest showmen to ever walk the face of the earth. Houdini knew more than just to get out of these challenges and these boxes and these handcuffs quickly. He would milk his audiences, and he would make them cry and cheer, and he always looked disadvantaged, and he would escape from this. Sometimes it took long periods of time, half an hour, 45 minutes.
Of all the escapes he performed in Europe, his greatest and most controversial feat was the mirror handcuff escape.
It was advertised on the buses in London. I mean, the buses carried Houdini on them all around town. It was really front page news. What happened was that one of the leading London papers challenged Houdini to get out of a pair of handcuffs that a locksmith in Birmingham had taken about literally 7 years to make.
Concealed by a waist-high curtained cabinet, Houdini began his task at 3:15 in the afternoon. Houdini escaped from the mirror cuffs in about an hour. Many believe that it was technically impossible for Houdini to pick the locks of the handcuffs.
The great Randy, who was probably the leading escape artist since Houdini's time, said he had to have had the key, that no one could have picked these cuffs.
Picture it this way. If Houdini fails, everybody feels bad. Houdini and his wife, the newspaper is reviled as taking advantage of this visitor from America. But if he gets out, everybody's happy. The newspaper's got a wonderful story, Houdini's got a wonderful engagement, and I think that Mrs. Houdini simply went to the reporter and laid it on the line. Look, we're going to fail, and you're going to fail, and everybody's going to feel really nasty, or vice versa. Which is it going to be? And they slipped him the key.
In addition to highly publicized events like the mirror cuffs, Houdini advertised his shows with large outdoor escapes.
Houdini was really sort of turning the downtown areas of cities into a theater. You know, he made this huge civic theater with 100,000 people watching his performances. I guess maybe the closest thing might be, you know, a Rolling Stones concert or something like that, where, you know, the stadium's packed with whatever, 70 or 80,000 people going crazy. But Houdini offered it free, and it was all a great come-on for his show that night.
After Houdini's tremendous success in Europe, he returned to America and immediately began to improve his illusions and escapes.
One of the really most interesting things to me about Houdini's career is its development, its evolution. He was constantly improving what he did. And it's interesting to see him take an escape, a particular escape, and work on it over his career into more and more dramatic and more bold and risky versions.
It took Houdini years to develop the dramatics that would make his escapes work as stage entertainment. One of his masterpieces was called the milk can escape.
He would get into a big galvanized milk can, sort of snuggle into it, though it was very tight. That would then be filled with water or with milk or occasionally with beer, and then that would be padlocked. And a little screen would be put around it, bang, very fast. The screen would be taken away, and there was Houdini standing there, sort of dripping wet, but there was the milk can next to him, and the padlocks were still on. People, in fact, could bring their own locks and padlock it with their own locks, and you'd still get out very quickly. Obviously, the idea of putting the water in there made it more exciting and more dangerous.
Houdini's spectacular success made him one of the most imitated acts in vaudeville. Houdini imitators popped up everywhere. Acts like Harry Houdini.
Just cutting an I at the end, or adding an E, or omitting an H, Houdini, or Houdinini, or what have you.
A gal in Germany used the name Miss Undina, U-N-D-I-N-A, and she had a poster made, almost a duplicate of Houdini's posters.
And he would go crazy, bonkers, when somebody used his name.
Houdini slapped a lawsuit on her.
I treasure my lawsuits. I don't know why, it's personal preference of Houdini. I rate because someone was using his name and proceeding to write to an attorney and filing a suit immediately from preventing that performer to use his name in any way, shape, or form.
Houdini was not only litigious, but downright ruthless in the pursuit of his imitators, even resorting to using rigged handcuffs.
As escape artists began to challenge and duplicate some of Houdini's stunts, Houdini doctored some of his handcuffs so that when he challenged them, and they did challenge each other, they would have a pair of handcuffs which they thought would open up with a key like this, but actually didn't. It opened up with a key like this. And they would beg to be taken out, and Houdini would only get them out at the end of the show. He'd made them sweat it out, and then would release them at that time after they would remove their claims that they defeated Houdini.
Houdini was certainly the most competitive person that I know anything about. I mean, the intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least. And Houdini could stand no rivals. And having really beaten out every other magician in the world, there weren't many people left for him to beat out but Robert Houdin.
On a trip to Paris in 1902, Houdini made a pilgrimage to the grave of the great illusionist Robert Houdin, the magician from whom he adopted his stage name. He asked for permission to lay flowers on his hero's grave, but Robert Houdin's family refused to see him. His response to this perceived insult was the book The Unmasking of Robert Houdin. In it, Houdini called Robert Houdin the Prince of Pilferers and wrote, "He purloined the ideas of magicians long dead and buried and proclaimed these as the fruits of his own inventive genius. That he might be known as the King of Conjurers, he sold his birthright of manhood and honor."
I think that as time goes on, he looks more embarrassing, Houdini. He looks, it becomes more obvious that he had a vendetta.
The attempted destruction of Robert Houdin's reputation had to do with getting rid of all rivals, finally, even historical rivals.
Houdini's ego had run rampant. The amount of newspaper publicity he obtained, the attention lavished on him by the public, and his enormous box office draw all contributed to his excessive personality. Some describe him as unbearable, always expecting to be the subject of conversation, never failing to be the center of every photograph. On one occasion, Bess Houdini was seen pacing backstage, calling attention to her husband's frequent use of I and me as he addressed the audience. But on July 17, 1913, Houdini's beloved mother died. It was an event that would forever alter Harry Houdini.
It really unseated him, so much so that, for a long while there, he gives up magic and escapes almost altogether. He starts doing completely different kinds of things. He almost gave up his career in show business.
A magician is not a juggler, he is an actor playing a role, the role of a sorcerer. So wrote the celebrated French conjurer Robert Houdin. If Robert Houdin had the gift of prophecy, he may have foreseen the arrival of his namesake, Harry Houdini. In the history of conjuring, no actor has been more celebrated. His complex, enigmatic personality still captivates us 7 decades after his death. But what was behind the drive and the intensity of Houdini is as much a mystery as the illusions he performed. He was a mass of contradictions.
Houdini was certainly the most competitive person that I know anything about. The intensity of his competitiveness surpasses anything in my experience, at least.
When you analyze Houdini, his greatest ability was his ability to get press. And he did nothing without a camera, without a reporter there.
And I would like to have them make him the way he really was, a very low-key outside of the stage. He was a very wonderful, kind man.
Born Erik Weisz, one of 5 sons of impoverished Jewish immigrants, he worked his way through cheap dime museums and burlesque shows to become the highest-paid variety performer of his time. By 1912, Houdini, through his own ingenuity, daring, and sizable ego, made himself into a household name. His performances were informed by the same story. He was always playing the role of the underdog, able to escape adversity despite overwhelming odds. Separating the real Houdini from the legend has been a labor of love for Houdini biographer Kenneth Silverman.
To me, one of the most extraordinary moments in Houdini's diary is the first time he did a manacled bridge jump escape. This is a very dangerous escape. He would be handcuffed, and then he would get on the top of a bridge, and sometimes leg cuffed too, jump into the water, handcuffed, and he would disappear underneath and have to somehow get out. A very, very dangerous stunt. His diary entry describing it, at the end of it, he has in big capital letters with exclamation points, "Ma saw me jump, Ma saw me jump."
Houdini was the classic dutiful son. He once wrote, "If God in his infinite wisdom ever set an angel upon earth in human form, it was my mother." It's difficult to understand how his wife Bess tolerated such absolute devotion.
He made it very clear to his wife, Bess, that the other woman in his life was his mother. Actually, it turns out she wasn't the only other woman in his life. The one affair that we know that Houdini had was with the widow of Jack London, the famous writer. Interestingly, one of the things that Houdini said to her, to Charmian London, when he got involved with her, very, very typical, the highest praise he could think of giving her was, "I would have told her my mother about you. It's the highest form of praise you can think of giving.
Houdini remained very close to his mother until her death in 1913. He received news of her passing while performing in Denmark, and he fainted immediately after reading the cable.
It really put him in a tailspin. For the first time, really, he stopped performing. He couldn't keep his dates. He really couldn't work anymore. His diaries are filled with just endless talk about his mother. He writes to everyone about her.
Mario Carandi is a successful collector and dealer in all things related to Harry Houdini. His collection gives him a unique perspective into the many facets of Houdini's personality.
After a while, owning so many Houdini documents and signatures, you can catch his mood. You can catch his speed when he writes his signature. When he's upset about something, I have letters that saying that so-and-so, I caught him at it, he deceived me, and his H's are very bold, and you can see he expresses his anger in the handwriting. In my collection of letters, I have several letters that I consider important, written personal letters, expressing emotions, expressing missing his mother.
Subsequent to his mother's death, Houdini wrote his brother Dasha, "It's tough, and I can't seem to get over it. Sometimes I feel all right, but when a calm moment arrives, I feel as bad as ever. Time heals all wounds, but a long time will have to pass before it will heal this terrible blow." The death of Houdini's mother increased his preoccupation with spiritualism, a movement sweeping through Europe and America. Mediums claimed to be able to make contact with the dead, who supposedly would reveal themselves at seances through levitations, handwriting, and knocking sounds.
Houdini's interest in spiritualism came at one of its heights when there was a lot of it going on, and he did have a desire to talk to his mother, and that created his reason for going to see spiritualists.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the legendary Sherlock Holmes, was an evangelist for the spiritualist movement. He had a strong belief in the maintenance of personal identity after death. Despite their different beliefs, Houdini and Doyle corresponded for 3 years and became very good friends.
Doyle's wife was a spiritualist, a medium, and Doyle offered to prepare a seance for Houdini at which his wife would try to get in touch with Houdini's mother. They met in Atlantic City, and at the hotel room, Doyle's wife went into a trance and started doing automatic writing. She wrote 16 whole pages of message from Houdini's mother, and the messages said, "My dear son, how glad I am to be in contact with you. You have no idea how joyful I am here." Doyle, after the seance, was just ecstatic. I mean, that he had been able to give Houdini proof of the afterlife.
Well, his mother came through, it seemed for a time, by writing the sign of the cross, addressing Harry as Harry, and then speaking to him in English. This was all fine, except that she barely spoke a word of English. She always talked in German. She always called him Erik, his true name. And she was married to a rabbi, which kind of makes the cross unlikely. Oops.
It left very bitter feelings. In fact, although he had been close with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, after another 2 or 3 years, they really drifted apart in a lot of bitterness.
He felt his intelligence was insulted. And perhaps he also felt personally insulted because he was very much affected by the death of his mother, and in an open-minded, exploratory kind of way, was willing to look at a seance or two at the time to see if there was something to it, and was deeply offended by the level of obvious deception that was going on.
As a result, Houdini vigorously attacked the spiritualist movement. Insisting that mediums were merely doing tricks, he duplicated their techniques. He attended spiritualist meetings in disguise and denounced the mediums, forever seeking to expose the fakes.
Harry busted every major medium he could get his hands on during that period in his life.
Why he went about it with such energy is it's interesting to speculate about. For one thing, he recognized that the mediums were doing some of the same things he was doing, but claiming to do them by supernatural means. He also, being a straight shooter, and as he always presented himself, resented the fact that the spiritualist mediums were thieving really off very poor people. They were people who couldn't afford the money. Houdini, he was such a moralistic sort of guy. He also had the feeling that what spiritualist mediums told their clients led to divorces, broke up families, that it led people into finally to become insane.
Houdini's mission to expose mediums seemed to be keeping him from his escape work, but there were other reasons.
He knew that he was starting to get a little long in the tooth for these incredibly demanding physical things he was doing. He was thinking of retiring at that stage in his career. He didn't know what he wanted to quite do.
It made sense. By 1918, Houdini's world was changing. Vaudeville was slowly dying as the new medium of film squeezed live entertainment out of theaters. He responded by transforming himself once again. In 1921, after starring in several films, he formed the Houdini Motion Picture Company. The new medium, he concluded, was the perfect place to showcase his daring escapes and preserve his legend for generations to come.
In The Man from Beyond, which was really Houdini's first picture, he's been frozen into a block of ice. I mean, he's somebody who's died in the 19th century, as I remember, on some kind of whaling vessel, and he's been frozen in Arctic ice, and he's chipped out, and he returned to life. He's taken back somehow to New York, and what's very strange about that movie, among other things, is that the opening shot is of a passage from the Bible, really about immortality, and it closes also with a picture of a passage from the Bible about immortality. And this whole idea of his being able to survive in the ice alive after 100 years is sort of taken in the movie as a sign that the soul survives death, really as a kind of spiritualist argument. That's interesting because at the very same time, Houdini is exposing all of these spiritualist mediums and showing that, they're really fraudulent. I guess it reveals some kind of sneaking, lurking desire in him really to believe in the possibility of survival.
Although he threw himself into the movies with characteristic zeal, Houdini's film career was considered a complete disaster. There are some very fundamental and basic reasons for this.
Houdini didn't count on the fact that he was camera shy, especially when he came to holding a girl, kissing a girl.
Houdini was no actor. I mean, he's absolutely awful, I think, in the pictures.
He was no Barrymore, I can tell you that right now.
Houdini thought that he could not only be in it, he could direct it, he could write it, and he could produce it. That's one of the big mistakes he made.
By 1923, Houdini gave up any hope of a career in Hollywood. Down, but not beaten, he increased his attacks on spiritualism and formulated yet another plan to revitalize his sagging career. At the age of 51, Houdini returned to magic and the stage. But unlike his vaudeville days, Houdini would now appear in a full evening show, booked to run in legitimate theaters. He opened in New York's Schubert Theater in December 1925. Pretty good, he wrote in his diary, for Dime Museum Houdini.
When he toured with his final show, he achieved really a lifelong dream of having a full evening of which there was a significant portion of just straight magic. That was actually something that had taken Harry most of his life to do, because in vaudeville you didn't do full evening performances. You did a quick vaudeville turn, which was the escape act and the water torture cell, or the escape act earlier and the metamorphosis. And so that final tour was the one chance he had to really mount a magic show that he had always dreamed of.
He was doing things like he had a big cabinet that looked like a radio, and he would tune the dials. He would show the cabinet empty, tune the dials, music would start coming out, and out from the top of the cabinet would pop a girl, and she would sort of be wearing her scanties, and the radio would be playing a Charleston. She'd do a little Charleston.
In the early part of Houdini's final tour, the Charleston dancer was 17-year-old Dorothy Young, chosen from an audition of more than 200 hopefuls. When Dorothy approached her father with the news, he refused to let her tour with the show, and the Houdinis intervened.
They asked to meet my father, and they convinced him that they would look after me as their very own daughter. They didn't have children. And they did. They were just wonderful, warm parents to me. I always called him Houdini, never Mr. Houdini or no Harry Houdini, just Houdini. And best, Mrs. H. Mrs. H and I opened the show doing that dance, and then he did the usual things, you know, the scarves and then the needle trick.
He was producing flowers, he was producing rabbits, he was producing silk handkerchiefs. Really, for the first time in his life since the beginning of his career, he was doing magic.
While the first act of this Houdini show was straight magic, the second act featured his escape work. It concluded with his most infamous escape of all, the Chinese water torture cell.
Every night when the Chinese water torture cell came on, Mrs. H always stood in the wings, and I always stood with her because it was very exciting. Houdini would come out and in a bathing trunks, and they would lower him head first in this tank full of water. And the tank had a glass in front of it so you could see Houdini. Before they put the curtain around him, they would let the audience have a full view of him. It was really frightening. Every place we went, there was always a full house. And we were playing Chicago once, and the house was sold out, and I don't know how he got my grandmother a seat. So I took her backstage later to meet Houdini, and he kissed her forehead, and he said, "Now I know where Dorothy gets all of her charm," and my grandmother was so pleased. The only time I remember Houdini ever being the least bit disturbed in the whole year I was with them was we were playing Buffalo, and the Prohibition was on at the time. And Mrs. H, who was she was opposite in personality with Houdini. She was jovial and liked to cut up a little bit. And so she said, "How about taking a bottle of liquor over?" None of us drank. So we took smuggled a bottle of liquor. And at dinner that night, somehow it was mentioned, and Houdini's eyes snapped. And he said, "Do you realize the adverse publicity we would have had if they had found that bottle?" And that was the only time in the whole year I ever remember him being a little disturbed. Otherwise, he was very even. He was a super showman, but in real life, he was very low-key, a compassionate, very caring, kind man.
By October of 1926, Houdini's tour progressed to Montreal, where he played the Princess Theatre. Several McGill University students interviewed Houdini in his dressing room for their school newspaper. The events that followed have been clouded by the mystique of the Houdini legend.
One of the students was doing a sketch of him. A third student, according to the story, asked Houdini if he could punch him in the stomach and said to him, I've heard that you can take a punch to the stomach. Do you mind if I punch you? And Houdini apparently said, no, I don't mind. And as Houdini was getting up off the bed, the sort of couch that he was resting on, the student started hitting him very hard in the stomach, punching him a couple of times.
Following the show that night, Harry and Bess traveled to Detroit. He performed as planned, but in a great deal of pain. He finally consented to see a doctor after the show. Houdini was diagnosed with acute appendicitis, most likely aggravated by the blow to the stomach he had received in Montreal. Houdini died a week later, on Halloween 1926, of complications from a ruptured appendix. His body was taken back to New York City, where thousands gathered for his funeral. Since then, his legend has only grown, something many attribute more to Bess than anyone else.
I've seen at the Library of Congress a scrapbook that she compiled after Houdini's death. It's certainly the most crazy and unusual scrapbook I've ever seen. It's first of all about the size of a refrigerator. I mean, I've just never seen a book like this. She got clipping services throughout the world to send her any article of any kind that just mentioned Houdini's name. And she took every single mention of his name and pasted it into the scrapbook.
I know she was lost without him because he was her whole life. I look back, it must have been very, very difficult for her.
Houdini, the psychic basher, promised his wife Bess that if there was a way back from death, he would find it. In characteristic Houdini style, he thought of the afterworld as one more lock to be picked and conquered. Bess Houdini held seances in an attempt to contact him, but gave up in 1936. It is true, Houdini did not materialize in the way he envisioned, but in one way he did live up to his promise.
The fact that you can walk down the streets even today and ask a child, my neighbor across the street, 11 years old, Houdini, and he looks at you and he says, magic. That doesn't happen with any other magician.
Houdini was such a powerful character, so charismatic. His name is so revered and so much a part of our vocabulary that many magicians find themselves living in his shadow.
Not only is he the only magician to be included in most dictionaries, but his very name has become part of our language.
I was down in Florida last winter, and I was going to church, and the pastor was preaching on someone in Isaiah, and he said, I guess he was trying to pull a Houdini. We all laughed.
This last achievement contains the key to Houdini's continued hold on our imagination. Of all his remarkable transformations, Houdini's most impressive was his ability to turn himself into a metaphor that will last through the ages.